If you think about it, a country's tax system is kind of like its operating system, right? It controls how money flows, what gets funded, and who foots the bill for what. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most complex and fascinating operating systems in the world, India's, and how it's being rewritten for a 21st century global economy.
So what's our game plan for this explainer? First, we'll take a look back at how India's tax system even came to be. Then, we'll break down how it hits people and profits. After that, we'll get into the weeds of the huge GST experiment. And then we'll zoom out to see how India is trying to manage the crazy world of international tax. And finally, we'll look ahead to what's on the horizon.
All right, first up, an evolving tax system. You see, to really get a grip on where India is today, we have to understand where it's come from. Its tax policies have been shaped by this incredible journey from a colonial past to a super fast-paced modern economy.
What's really fascinating here is the complete 180-degree turn in strategy. Right after independence, the whole goal was social equity, so they had these really high taxes on the wealthy to redistribute wealth. But then, fast forward to 1991, and the thinking had totally flipped. The new idea was, hey, a rising tide lifts all boats, so they slashed rates to spark economic growth. And then again in 2017, with GST, the focus shifted to taming the sheer complexity that was holding businesses back. It's really a story of a country constantly tweaking its economic engine.
Okay, so with that history in our back pocket, let's look at how India taxes people and companies today. And this brings us to what we call direct taxes. The ones that come straight out of your paycheck or a company's bottom line.
So how does India handle personal income tax? Well, it uses a progressive system, which is pretty common. You see the same thing in the US and a lot of the EU. The core idea is simple, right? The more you earn, the higher your tax rate. This is a very deliberate choice, all about trying to balance social fairness and making sure those who have a greater ability to pay, well, they contribute more.
Now, what about businesses? This is where you can really see India's strategic balancing act in action. They're not trying to be the next Singapore with these super low, rock-bottom rates, but they are trying to be way more attractive than economic giants like the US or Japan. A perfect example of this was that big 2019 rate cut for new manufacturers that was a direct play to boost their Make in India campaign.
And now for what might be one of the biggest tax reforms in recent history anywhere, the great GST experiment. This whole thing was about tackling indirect taxes. That's the tax we all pay on pretty much everything we buy.
To get why GST was such a massive deal, you have to picture what it was like before. It was a chaotic patchwork of different taxes in different states. It was a mess. A truck carrying goods across the country literally had to stop at multiple checkpoints to pay all these different taxes. So, GST was this radical attempt to create one single economic market with one tax, all the way from the Himalayas down to the Indian Ocean.
But here's the thing. Simple doesn't mean a one-size-fits-all tax. As you can see here, India went for a multi-layered system. Think of it like this. Staple foods, the real essentials? No tax. A new smartphone? A moderate tax. A luxury car? Yeah, that gets a much higher rate. It's definitely a complex approach, but the goal is to balance getting revenue with social equity so the tax burden doesn't hit the poor the hardest.
And to put that into perspective, just look at a country like New Zealand. They have a single GST rate for almost everything. It's incredibly efficient and simple to run. India, on the other hand, chose a much more complex path. It's a classic trade-off, isn't it? Do you go for maximum simplicity, or do you build a system that tries to account for huge social and economic differences? India definitely chose the latter.
But hey, a country's tax system doesn't just stop at its borders, right? In our super connected world, the biggest challenges often come from huge international companies. So this brings us to our fourth section, how India is trying to police a globalized economy.
And this question right here really gets to the heart of the problem for tax authorities everywhere. How do you tax a company that makes millions from your citizens but doesn't have a single office or factory or maybe even a single employee in your country? The old rules just don't work, and that's a massive challenge.
One of the main tools India uses to create some stability is something called a Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement, or a DTAA. These are basically crucial treaties that make sure a company's income isn't taxed twice, once in its home country and then again in India. That kind of predictability is absolutely vital if you want to attract foreign investment.
Now, at the same time, India also has to play defense. Imagine this. A global company has a branch in India that develops some amazing software, and another branch in a low-tax country that sells it. The company could just have the Indian branch sell the software to the other branch for a ridiculously low price, say $1. That way, pretty much all the profit is made in the low-tax country. That is exactly what transfer pricing rules are designed to stop. India basically says, no way, you have to trade between your own branches at a fair market price, and believe me, they watch this stuff very, very closely.
And to tackle that whole everywhere and nowhere digital economy problem, India came up with the equalization levy. It's essentially a digital services tax. It goes right after the revenue that foreign tech giants make from Indian users, even if they don't have a physical office in the country. It's a pretty bold move, and it actually puts India in line with a growing global trend.
So after all that, where does this leave us? Well, in our final section, let's look at the road ahead, the hurdles India still has to get over, and what the future might look like for its tax policy.
You see, despite all the big reforms, some major challenges are still there. A huge part of India's economy is informal, operating outside the tax system. And for the small businesses that are in the system, keeping up with the rules can still be incredibly complicated. So streamlining everything and figuring out how to bring more of the economy into the formal tax net, those are the big hurdles to clear.
Looking forward, there are a few interesting paths India might take. Making the GST even simpler is a big one. They might also start exploring green taxes to push for sustainability, kind of like what we're seeing in the EU. And, of course, improving their digital infrastructure will be absolutely key for compliance, just like staying aligned with major global tax reforms that are being worked out right now.
Which brings us to our final big question. This is the ultimate balancing act for India's policymakers. Can they actually create a system that nails all three goals at once? A system that's simple enough for everyone to follow, fair enough to support society, and powerful enough to fund the ambitions of a rising global power? The answer to that question will pretty much define India's economic future.